Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us from the Ohio AgNet, the voice you know with the News You Trust studio, sponsored by the Grain Equipment Company, where innovation meets execution. I'm Joe Everett. Looking at the calendar, go to grainelevatorauction.com for the liquidation sale of Wilman Seeds buildings and equipment. Bidding ends February 20th at 4 p.m. That's grainelevatorauction.com for complete information. While the Trump administration is prepping to move away from depopulating entire flocks infected by bird flu, the focus will instead be on biosecurity and medication to contain those outbreaks. Reports last week that the USDA has given conditional approval to Zoetis to use its bird flu vaccine in poultry. Zoetis, which deals with vaccines, medicines, and diagnostics for animals, said that the conditional license was granted based on safety. A conditional approval, also called a conditional license, is used for emergencies, limited market availability, or other special circumstances, and is only issued for a certain period. Last month, USDA committed to rebuilding a stockpile of bird flu vaccines for poultry that matched the strain of virus circulating in commercial flocks and wild birds. Moderna is developing a bird flu vaccine for humans and received a large government grant for its advancement. While tracking fertilizer prices for the second week of February, 6 fertilizer prices were higher while 1 was lower and 1 was unchanged from the prior month. DTN designates a significant move of anything 5% or more. Urea was 9% higher compared to last month with an average price of $536 per ton. UAN 32 was 7% more expensive with an average price of $393 per ton. UAN 28 was 5% higher and had an average price of $342 per ton. 3 fertilizers that were slightly more expensive looking back a month. DAP was an average price of $754 per ton, and 1034O was $638 per ton, and anhydrous was $747 per ton. One fertilizer that was slightly less expensive than a month ago was potash, had an average price of $442 per ton, and one fertilizer that was unchanged from last month was MAP, and it had an average price of $809 per ton. Well, legislation would allow year-round E15. Senators Chuck Grassley and Deb Fischer of Iowa, both Senate Ag Committee members, reintroduced the Nation Consumer and Fuel Retailer Choice Act of 2025. The legislation is currently the only permanent nationwide solution to unleash the power of E15, which would fulfill the White House mandate for energy independence. The legislation would end years of patchwork regulations and provide certainty for producers and consumers. E15 is good for consumers, the environment, and our national security, Grassley said. Authorizing the year-round nationwide sale of E15 is common sense and will help cut prices at the pump, create jobs in rural America, and restore America's energy dominance. Monty Shaw, executive director of Iowa Renewable Fuels Association, says as farm income has plummeted, year-round E15 represents the single biggest way to build demand for corn in the near term. Rural America is done waiting, and the time for E15 is now. Let's check in with Matt Reese for an update from this week's podcast.
Many farmers are not aware that you can depreciate the value of those excess nutrients after a farmland purchase. We take a look at that in this week's Ohio AgNet podcast, plus an update from the Ohio Forestry Association annual meeting and a look at the devastation taking place in western Ohio with high-path avian influenza. That and much more in this week's Ohio AgNet podcast up at ocj.com or wherever your podcasts are found.
Thanks, Matt, for the update. Stay tuned. We'll be back with your markets after this.
Did you know that soybeans are the secret sauce behind Ohio's booming poultry farms? Each year, poultry consume a whopping 937 million bushels of soybean meal nationwide. This high-protein powerhouse keeps chickens and turkeys thriving, making Ohio number 2 in egg production and number 9 in turkey farming. From farm to table, soybeans power the farms that feed families. Brought to you by Ohio soybean farmers and their checkoff.
Help maximize your yield potential and savings with 0% financing on leading fungicides from BASF. You can't beat 0%, especially when you could save big on consistent performing fungicides like Revitec fungicide and Veltima fungicide until March 15, 2025. 0% financing means keeping more in your wallet for better ROI. Talk to your BASF retailer today about the Grower Finance Program. Subject to credit approval, terms and conditions. See BASF Grower Finance Program for details. Always read and follow label directions.
You're listening to the Ohio AgNet. Today's markets brought to us by Seed Consultants. Simply better performance online at seedconsultants.com. Well, things closed in the red in Chicago. Let's start off with March corn, $4.97.5, down 4.5. If you hold that out to May, $5.12 down 3.5. December new crop corn, $4.76.5, down a penny. As for soybeans, March soybeans $10.31 3/4, down 6 3/4. May soybeans $10.48 1/4, down 7 1/4. November new crop soybeans $10.51 1/4, down 6 3/4. March wheat $5.92, down 12 3/4. July wheat $6.19 3/4, down 10 1/4. In livestock, February live cattle $197.82, up 37 cents. April live cattle $194.77, up 75 cents. April lean hogs $89.75, down $3.45. May lean hogs $93.62, down $3.25. April feeder cattle $268.60, down 50 cents, and May feeder cattle $267.05, down 27 cents. This is the Ohio AgNet.